And if it's meant to be, you'll still put it out there. But I have a whole lot of half-eaten sandwiches in Word documents that never made it to Twitter.
Half-eaten sandwiches. Oh my!
That's what I call them. Like I took 2 bites and I was like, yeah, nah, this is giving me an upset stomach. I'm gonna put this down.
Welcome to Let's Lime.
Let's Lime is a fresh collaboration between NFJC and the Cardio Nerds.
LIME stands for Leadership and Innovation in Medicine and Education.
To lime also means to hang out with your friends.
We sit down with some of today's visionaries in medicine to talk leadership, education, drive, and more.
We are your hosts, Caitlin Blashart and Justin Burke.
All right, let's lime.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to the inaugural episode of Let's Lime. As you've just heard, Let's Lime is a joint initiative between members of the Cardio Nerds Academy. We have on the line Amit Goyal, Daniel Ambinder, and Justin Burke, and then some members of the Nephrology social media crew, Nyan Aurora, Matt Sparks, Joel Toff, and myself, Caitlin Blashart. We're very excited to kick off the series with an incredible first guest, Dr. Kimberly Manning.
And so Dr. Kimberly Manning is an associate professor at Emory University, as well as a general internist in hospital at Grady Memorial Hospital. While nephrology and cardiology want to claim her, often unknown to everyone else, she is actually a med-peds physician. So we claim her as a part of our community. She serves as the Associate Vice Chair of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and is the Program Director for the Transitional Year Medical Program. She's an alumnus of Tuskegee University and Meharry Medical College and is nationally recognized for her involvement in medical education, including a recent award, the ACGME Parker J. Palmer Courage to Teach Award. She's been a long-time blogger, so she's also someone who's really been a part of this digital health education movement and has now reached international acclaim as @GradyDoc on Twitter, where she has over 62,000 followers, which among this group, that's the greatest credential that anyone can really claim. And then on a more personal note, when I was in residency, she came to share her innovative 7-minute bite-sized teaching beast mode pedagogy, a way to slim down teaching to short and clear concepts in a very minimal amount of time. And it was really revolutionary to everyone here and has been inspiring. And I think she demonstrated how a small encounter in medical education, whether it's a 7-minute beast mode presentation or a 1-day visit to your residency program, can really forever change the way you see and teach medicine. So Dr. Manning, we are delighted that you are able to join us tonight to talk about narrative medicine, #what's your why, and other topics as they come up. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. And I do have to make sure that I point out that there was a teaching competition for our bite-sized teaching while I was there visiting at your residency program. And I had the great honor to coach, I think there were like 9 of you, and it was like speed mentoring, one after the other in like 20-minute clips. Justin was our winner. He didn't tell you that. He was trying to, be chill about it. I think he didn't really want to say that because Dan gave an amazing talk on aortic stenosis that I still remember. And, I guess he didn't want to throw you any shade there, Dr. Ambinder, but
Dr. Ambinder, he set me up for my opening joke, which I think is what pushed me over the finish line. So, Caitlin, I'll give it back to you.
I do want to mention one thing because it's Black History Month. I have to say, I normally wouldn't make this correction, but since the first time we met, Justin, I've been promoted to professor. And so, I have to give myself those props because.
Absolutely. I'm so embarrassed.
Don't be, because this is an opportunity for a teachable moment, because out of the 38,975 full professors in the US, 307 of them are Black women. And so I want to be very clear to make that distinction that I got an upgrade in 2020 that I worked for. And so I want to make that clear.
There we go. I appreciate it. Excellent. I'm so glad you said something.
Oh, no problem.
So we should kick off the discussion. But before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the integral role that the audience plays in Let's Lime. So many of the questions that we'll be discussing will be questions from the live audience that's here with us now, the NSMC and Cardio Nerds interns and faculty, as well as questions from the Twitter audience that have come in ahead of the show. So I'd like to kick it off with the first question, which is about narrative medicine. I was wondering, Dr. Manning, if you could share with us how you got started with narrative medicine and why you think it works so well as a means to communicate and to connect with people.
Okay, so like many people, I was always a person who liked stories. I come from a family of storytellers. And so as a kid, I always sort of journaled to myself and kept the diary with the crappy lock on it that, my brother would break into and read and embarrass me. But really, my pivotal moment happened when I was a junior faculty member, when I joined a faculty development program. I'm a big believer in faculty development. To some degree, this is a form of development as well. So there was an opportunity where in this session, it wasn't meant to be a narrative session, but it was just one piece of a faculty development where we were asked to write a critical incident report about something that happened that was pivotal for us as clinicians. And I wrote a story longhand on a sheet of, yellow paper about my experience having my first voluntary HIV test. And in this session, we read our stories aloud. And the person who was leading the session, Dr. Bill Branch, who was my former division director in general medicine at Grady, he said, "This is very good. You should type this up and submit it to a journal." And I was, in my second or third year on faculty. It never, ever occurred to me that somebody would take something that I wrote and publish it in a peer-reviewed journal. I had never even heard of that when I was in residency. And quite frankly, it was because of the encouragement of Dr. Branch that I submitted that piece. And I have to say, I thought I was a pretty decent writer, but that piece, when I sent it in, it skipped peer review. I heard straight from the editor. And the editor said, "I want to publish this and I want to publish this fast," and was very affirming. And so from there, I just started to spend more time writing and then moved over to blogging because I needed a space to be able to write without rules and to kind of practice that muscle. So I think that's kind of how it really happened for me in the academic space. I think inside, I was always a person who enjoyed writing.
And maybe this is a good segue to one of our live questions coming in from Dr. Joel Toff. Joel, you submitted a question. I'm happy to read it for you. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Unmuted, never miss an opportunity to self-promote, right? Because this is really all about me, right? Because, we're internet land, No, you are such a role model across medical Twitter. I'm sure beyond medical Twitter, but that my perception is looking at medical Twitter. And I just kind of wanted you to comment a bit on the role of mentoring in the kind of the over Twitter and over social media, because your influence is way bigger than your institution. And I think you have an opportunity to do a lot of good. And I'd like to hear your perspective on that.
Well, right back at you. And I'm glad you unmuted because I just like any opportunity to hear your voice over any sort of podcast. But that's beyond the point of the question. So what I'll say is this. One of my favorite words is intention. I really, really try to be intentional about the things that I do. And I have been in this space for the last few years where I think that everyone should be thinking about how can you be your best steward of your influence? Because I think we all have influence. We have spheres of influence. Some are larger, some are smaller, but I think they grow and become more meaningful if you are doing the thing that is your jam. And, for the start of my career, I was doing the things that I thought other people valued. And, right now I'm really in this intentional space of trying to be mission driven. And what is that mission for me? The mission for me is tackling what breaks my heart. And what breaks my heart are people not being able to be themselves in learning environments and in clinical environments, whether that be, a Black woman who shows up and who spends all of her cognitive effort code switching to seem like she's somebody other than who she is, whether that be, the woman who wears hijab and who feels funny when she does, that person who English is not their first language and they feel, awkward about that. All of these things, that breaks my heart. So one thing I try to do is present as my whole self so that other people feel permitted to do that. And then also just thinking about, well, what unique things can I add to a space that is just not empty, right? What can I write that I would like to read? The author Toni Morrison said when she wrote her first book, The Bluest Eyes, she said, I wrote that book because I wanted to read it. So I try to prepare the talks that I would like to hear. I try to write the stories that I would like to read. And I think that if we all start to work in spaces where we feel authentic and we're kind of doing that thing that's our jam, it doesn't feel oppressive. You don't feel as put upon. And I think people are drawn to it. So I say, if you can kind of reflect on the word intention and think about, okay, so maybe I'm a fellow, maybe I'm a senior resident, but when I walk into a space, what is my sphere of influence and how can I operate in the space of intention? And that could be on Twitter or that could be in your daily life, how you talk to a nurse or a medical student. But I think it's something that all of us can do. And I just try to do it with intention. I've been fortunate that people have responded to it, Joel.
Thank you. And I think you mentioned recently in a tweet that establishing kind of intentionality and defining #what's your why helps protect your wellness and quote unquote, avoiding being flattered into overextension, as you wrote. I guess it's sort of an interesting spin on learning how to say no to different things. I was wondering how you choose what to say yes to, because I imagine you must get invited to do a number of different events and talks. And how do you choose what to say yes to?
Yeah. So I'm sure many of you have heard of this thing, the Ikigai, there are these rings that all come together and in the middle, your purpose is in the middle. The first time I ever saw that, I thought, wow, this is really cool. But the problem is my attention span is so short that I couldn't quite figure out what everything meant. So I broke that down smaller to what I call my quick Ikigai. And my quick Ikigai is just 3 rings. And those 3 rings are time, energy, and money. And that's the truth. And so, and in the middle of time, energy, and money is mission and impact. So in the very center of that is mission and impact. So my mission, right, is diversity, equity, and inclusion, medical education, mentoring, teaching, innovations in medical education. So those are sort of mission-driven things. But the piece that you then have to start paying attention to, especially as more and more people become aware of you and ask you to do things, is impact. Because sometimes I may be asked to do something that's in a very small space where, the impact, it may be a better opportunity for me to sponsor somebody else to do that thing other than me. And so if the impact doesn't really align with where I am right now, and I try to make the impact as great as possible, then I'll sponsor another person. But sometimes I started recognizing, and I'm sure many of you have been in this situation too, where even the act of saying no, writing an email that says no, or thinking through what a no sounds like, that takes up cognitive effort too. So I have an email file called Regrets for Every Season. And I'm serious. It has like 12 different ways to say no for different things. The person that was connected to me through one of my favorite mentors that I deeply respect, but I don't want to do this. I have a response for that, and then I tweak it. So mission and impact for me, the time, energy, and money piece is important because my husband and my children, they're not doctors, they're not medical educators. And every moment that I take away from them, I honor them through placing a value on my expertise and my time. And so some of the things I'm being asked to do, I'm leaning in and asking, is there an honorarium so that I can take my family to the beach and do something with them fun? Me and my family went to Africa in 2019, and that was in large part because I started to think more carefully about that piece. So I do think placing value on things matters too. So, the impact might get greater depending on what you're talking about from that end, right? So I think that's a significant thing too, that often as URIMs and women, I think, and people in academic medicine, period, that becomes a taboo thing that people don't want to talk about. And I do.
I wanted to ask a little bit about this, what's the why too, and this is something that's come up for a lot of the trainees that are, linked in right now into our talk. There seems to be this pressure to focus or narrow your focus very early on. Is there ever a point where it's too early to kind of establish this what's your why, or how can trainees kind of start working on developing this what's your why when you're kind of pulled into a lot of directions and don't want to pigeonhole your career at an early point?
Yeah. So first thing, I don't want to confuse anybody. Most of those what's your why tweets that I write about, they focus specifically on vaccine deliberation and people trying to decide us to explore why people do or do not wish to be vaccinated. But this idea of sort of finding what your jam is or finding out, what you're supposed to be doing, I think if you're a person who is lucky enough to know what that is. And I do think there are people who know that. Like, for example, there's a woman who I work with at Emory, Dr. Jennifer Spicer. She's a medical educator. I met Jennifer Spicer when she was an M1. And as an M1, she said, I'm going to do medical education. I'm going to become an infectious disease doctor, and I'm going to teach medical students at Emory. And let me tell you something. Jennifer Spicer told me that in 2007. And in 2021, Jennifer Spicer is doing infectious diseases, medical education, and teaching medical students at Emory. Some people know what they want to do. And if you're one of those people, great. I wasn't one of those people. And so the main intervention there are your mentors and your coaches. You have got to have you a squad of good mentors to help you kind of discern what you should do and what you shouldn't do as you try things out, or you will get flattered into doing a whole bunch of things that eat up your time. So I think that having good mentors is one thing, but if you know what your jam is early, I don't think you should let anyone tell you you're too junior to follow the path that you feel very confident about. Because I think, once you get kind of into residency and into fellowship, you're a little bit beyond just an emerging adult. You're not 18, you're not 19, you're old enough to maybe say, I think I'm strongly interested in this thing, and this is what I'm going to do.
How often do you find that your whys or your driving kind of forces change? Is it pretty static and kind of constant, or do you have some parts that tend to change?
Oh my gosh, a lot of things change, Caitlin. I think sometimes it depends upon what's happening in the world, right? So right now I am most busy. The busiest I am is talking to people about vaccine uptake. I don't have a master's in public health. I don't consider myself a public health person, but I started tweeting about this idea because I got tired of everybody saying that every time a Black person said they didn't wish to be vaccinated, that it was because of medical mistrust or misinformation. I was like, there's a whole bunch of reasons people say no. And so I started doing that. And what happened was, because of how widely used Twitter is, people saw it, and it sort of led to this thing that I'm spending a lot of time doing now. If you had asked me 2 years ago, would I be doing something in public health spaces? I would be like, no. But you sort of sometimes need to follow mission, because I think it still aligns with mission. It's a DEI issue for me. It's a diversity, equity, and inclusion, and anti-racism issue. And so I think it evolves as you grow in certain areas, and also as you enjoy it. There's this, I heard it on a podcast before, so I don't know to whom to give credit for it, but there's this thing that I heard about that I do that's called writing out what your ings are. And your ings are the things that you love to do, like teaching, creating, speaking, writing, explaining, supporting, inspiring, right? And I have a whole list of my ings. And if somebody asks me to do something, I look and see how many of my ings are covered with that. And if too many of my ings don't fit in that, it's a no, because it's going to feel oppressive. And sometimes I feel like it's a no, and I'm not sure if it's an opportunity that I should take. And I take those things to my mentors. I say, look, I got asked to do this thing. I low-key don't want to do it. So what should I do? And my mentor might say, this is something you need to do. And I do it.
This is great. And one of the submitted questions we had was from a medical student, Nazifa Laher. And she kind of asks, in trying to decide on how to do some of these things, specifically with a lot of the advocacy work that you do in general, and now with the COVID vaccine, how do you balance advocacy with your work? And what social media etiquette or other tips would you have for someone who's a medical student using Twitter and social media?
Yeah, so I think whatever you do, it should have a point. And then you should also protect your brand. And your brand for us, right, if we're in an academic space, is continuing to be regarded respectfully in an academic space. So if I say something, I imagine, well, what if I say this and it is placed on a jumbotron and my chair or my dean leans into a microphone and reads it? Would I be mortified? If the answer is yes, that's probably something that I should really think about, whether or not I want to write that, because I wish to stay at my institution right now. So that's one thing. If you don't care about that, then that's one thing, but I do. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing too is to always play the long game. Think about what is the point. And I actually just thought about something, Justin. I think what we were saying is what's the what. I think it was mixing with my what's your why, but what's the what?
Sorry.
No, because I was thinking like, yeah, we did talk about this before, you and I. And the what's the what, meaning like, why am I saying this? What is the point of this, right? So as an example, I remember there was somebody that a learner that I was talking to who was upset about something and took to Twitter. And, we sort of unpacked it because it kind of looped back to them in ways that weren't positive. And we kind of talked about, well, if your point was to make people think, if your point was to kind of provoke thought, there are ways to do that don't annihilate your brand and your professional reputation. So I think that you have to have some spaces where you have limits, and it has to also be authentic to you. So sometimes if I tell a story over Twitter, and to be authentic to the story, I must include an F-bomb, I'll include it. But there are some people that under no circumstances would you ever hear them say an F-bomb. So that's really not authentic to them. And the things that I write that have included something like, profanity to make a point, I imagine if my chair read it or my dean read it, I think I would be okay in those situations. So I say be authentic to you, but also do not do things when you are in a high emotional state. If you're very upset about something, write it in Word first and sit on it. Don't write it in draft, because sometimes you'll write something in draft, hit the wrong button, and it'll go out into the Twitter universe. Write it in. If you're upset or you're emotional about it, write it in Word, sit on it for a little bit. And if it's meant to be, you'll still put it out there. But I have a whole lot of half-eaten sandwiches in Twitter. In Word documents that never made it to Twitter.
Half-eaten sandwiches. Oh my!
That's what I call them. Like I took 2 bites and I was like, yeah, nah, this is giving me an upset stomach. I'm gonna put this down.
We have a lot of great questions coming in the chat, but before we get to those, I just wanted to quickly ask what your process is for kind of the reflection piece. When does that happen? And can you walk us through sort of how you decide what makes it into these Word docs? And then from the Word docs, how does that make it onto Twitter? What's your kind of process there?
So it's more than one way. It depends on how I'm feeling. There have been things that I have written in the hair salon under the dryer on my cell phone. There have been things I've sat in a car wash writing. And sometimes if it's something a little more provocative, I will write it in Word first so I can do all the word counts and all of that too. But, I'm a believer in, writing being like a muscle that you develop. And the more you write, the more you can write. It's kind of like if you want to run distance, you need to run. And so I try to write every, day or two. And I try to write about the extraordinary aspects of ordinary things. And I think that's a great place to practice your writing so that you won't feel like, you have to have like this moment where your patient looked at you with a teardrop dangling from their lower lash. It trickled down their cheek. It doesn't have to be all that. It can just be you were walking across the street from one building to the other and it was cold and somebody asked you for $1. And then you think about, well, how can I tell a whole story around that? So my process depends on the urgency I feel about the story. Sometimes I just feel a deep urgency in me about something that I've seen and I need to get it out. And if I'm on my computer and I have, the time, I'll type it into my computer in a Word document. But sometimes that urgency is so great that it will happen on my cell phone. And I have to be careful. Fortunately, now I know that you can write the whole tweetorial or tweet thread and then send the whole thing at the end. I used to not know that. So I used to tweet in one aliquot at a time. And people would be like, oh my gosh, you give us these cliffhangers. It was not because I was trying to be awesome. It was because I didn't realize you could actually tweet it all. So yeah, I think it really depends on the urgency, but I love writing. It makes me feel better. Sometimes I feel anxious until I've written.
I think there is a lot of questions about mentorship. And so I want to take a moment to hit some of them. One of the submitted questions was from a medical student, Michelle Janess, who asked about the foundation, what makes a good mentor-mentee relationship? But then also there's a couple of questions, essentially, how do you find a mentor or a squad of mentors? What do you look for? So what makes a good mentor and how can people start recruiting good mentors?
Yeah, so this is such a good question that I wish I had asked somebody when I was very junior and I didn't. But first of all, the best mentors are people who have time for you, number one. Number two, people who are willing to make time for you. Because one of my favorite things I say to people is busy is a liar. People do what they want to do. And if somebody has, don't take it personally if you are not one of the things that they have decided to make time for, just move on and find someone else. So great mentors have time for you and they're interested in you. Now, I think a lot of potentially great mentors don't get to become great mentors because they don't have good mentees. So I actually think the real magic happens with you as a mentee. So the best example I can give is me as a mentee, right? So I have mentors that I specifically go to for specific things. Dr. Jada Bussey Jones is my main mentor. She mentors me on all things leadership and career. Dan Hunt, though, who is our division chief in hospital medicine, he mentors me specifically on clinical teaching. And, I used to have this idea that I needed to find someone who mirrored me. Like I thought I needed to find a Black woman who does general medicine and likes medical education, but that isn't how it works. People can be interested in you and have time for you and be able to mentor you on a particular thing and be completely different than you. Carlos Del Rio is one of my other mentors. He's an infectious disease doctor and a man. So when I meet with, for example, Dan Hunt, I think this will be helpful to kind of give you some context. When I'll have a specific problem or concern, a thing I want to meet on, I will send an email and say, Dan, I want to meet specifically about bedside teaching and about how to maximize teaching opportunities in COVID because my students can't go into the COVID rooms and I'm feeling like disconnected from my learners. So also, I want to talk to you about this workshop I submitted to SHM that got rejected. And I want to look at it and see if I can, tune it up and submit it somewhere else. So that is what our talk will be. I'll send my workshop information, send what my question is, and we'll meet. And when we meet, we first, we start off with the one thing that we had to talk about, and he'll give me feedback. We'll talk about it, and then we'll go look over my workshop thing. And the meeting will be like 30 or 40 minutes. And then the last piece of the meeting is me following up on what we talked about before. So I have a meeting coming up with him, and it's going to be all about unpacking how bedside presentations and bedside teaching has been going for me, because that's something he's been coaching me on and mentoring me on. So I think as a mentee, you need to think about what people can do for you when you go out and get your mentors. But if they demonstrate to you that they don't have time for you, if you keep trying to reach them and they're not making time for you, find somebody else. You don't have time for that. And there are people that will have time for you. And then as far as, don't forget your peer mentors too. In my day-to-day life, my peer mentors, that is my street team. That's the people that, I'm showing things to real quick. I'm running this thing by. Hey, what do you think about this? Am I tripping if I said this? Those are the people in real time that can give you advice. And I would say the prerequisite for those individuals are that they should not be in competition with you. If anybody makes you feel like you are competing with them, or like they throwing you shade in any kind of way, then keep it moving because you don't have time for that.
We have another question from the audience from Kia Sanderson, who's one of the NSMC interns. She asks how you manage your clinical work, teaching, research, mentorship duties with your social media presence. Do you just flow with it with time, or do you feel that you dedicate sort of a certain amount of time to each intentionally?
So my job is that I'm a doctor. And so that gets priority. And social media is something that gets to happen either on the fly or it happens when I'm done with what I have to do. So, we say to our kids all the time, you got to do what you got to do, and then you can do what you want to do. What I got to do, unfortunately, I like to do is take care of patients and teach medical students and residents. So during those time periods, I tend to be very regimented about my schedule. When I'm not on, so right now I'm on the hospital service, and it just as a snapshot of my day, this is a crazy day. This morning, I gave grand rounds virtually at UT Southwestern. Then I rounded with my team and taught on the wards all day. At 4:00, I did the MGH teaching retreat. And then, I had finished all my charting and everything by then, made dinner for my family, talked to my sons, got on a Twitter chat with circulation quality outcomes. And then I joined you all. But I knew this was going to be a crazy day, so I hyper planned it. So I didn't really spend much time content creating on Twitter. Most of my Twitter engagement today was passive. And so when I'm very busy, I allow myself passive use of social media, meaning consumer only. But I have to have a fair chunk of time for content creation. And that is only after I've finished the things that are essential for me to do.
As part of that, with Twitter in your career and recently, your Twitter has more than doubled in the past year with over 62,000 followers. How has your experience changed on the platform, and how has the platform, how you've used it so successfully in your career? How has the platform changed you, and how have you kind of changed with the platform?
I think that one of the ways that it's changed is I think I just better understand it. When I first got on Twitter, I didn't understand it so well. So I'll just be like, what is going on? But one thing I have figured out, and I think that anybody who doesn't have many followers and who wants to use more Twitter more effectively, really is important to tweet inside of a mission box. I do consume things on Twitter that interest me. Like I was very interested in Michelle Obama's beautiful pantsuit that she wore to the inauguration. I liked the curl in her hair and the flip, and I wanted to know who did her makeup. And I looked at all of that on Twitter, but did I comment on it? No. Did I follow anybody who was doing it? No. Did I retweet that? No. And it's because I didn't want to draw individuals to my feed that are looking for that content, because that is not really within mission on what I talk about. But I really enjoy looking at a lot of things. So I separate my consumption from my content creation and what I interact with. And I feel as though I've kind of curated a following of people who sort of know what they're coming for. If you draw too many different types of people, that's when you start to get a lot of really jarring and upsetting comments. And some of those you get anyway, just by the nature of being, a Black woman working in this space. The higher you fly, the easier it is to shoot you out of the sky. And that will happen. But at the same time, I think that if you can tweet inside of a very clear mission for yourself and be thoughtful about that piece, it's just, it just allows you to do more of what you like to do. And I think that's been the most fun piece. Most of what I'm getting asked to do is what I like to do. It's what I get to talk about the things I actually want to talk about, instead of, hey, will you come talk about anaphylaxis, when anaphylaxis is not my jam. When there was a time in my career, if any talk that was a national talk and I thought would look good on my CV, I was like, okay. Whereas now I'm getting to talk about things that I just, I feel qualified to talk about and interested in talking about.
We have a related question from the audience from Tommy Doss. How do you approach a forum, i.e. Twitter, that's accessible to both medical and non-medical individuals, making your work potentially impactful for both groups of people?
That's interesting. I think I thought about that a lot more when I was blogging, because when I blogged, the majority of the people who read my blog were not doctors. But, periodically I just nerd out and scroll through who's following me on Twitter. And quite frankly, it's primarily people in medicine. It's a mixture of, physicians and interprofessionals and people in leadership roles. And then there's some other people too who are just sort of interested. But I mostly, when I'm talking on Twitter, I don't work super hard to make it not sound like I'm talking to people in this space. And again, if you follow me, you will either catch on to it to some degree, or you will go find somebody else to follow. So I think I don't spend that much time on that piece. But I think, like many things, our patients, our friends, and many people, they have the capacity to understand way more than we give them credit for. And in my baseline life, I'm not super jargony. And so fortunately, I don't talk super jargony anyway. See, listen, super jargony, is that even like a word? No. But saying that, I just think the point is that if you decide to come into this little mission box with me, this is what you're going to get. And I try to stay true to that and not get myself so exhausted thinking about what everybody's going to think.
I think there's a lot of, these are great, the staying on brand on Twitter and kind of curating your audience. I know one of our, we have a live audience question that Amit submitted about innovative platforms. So Amit, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Dr. Manning, one of the reasons I follow you is for the narratives that you share in tutorial form. And you're such a gifted writer that in such a limited space, you're able to express so much imagery, so much emotion, and the words is palpable, right? But you're also such a gifted speaker. We've got right now, I think, nearly 60 people who are just so much in the present moment here with us, listening to you and learning from you. So what are your thoughts about, and have you given much thought into Clubhouse as a way to reach people and move people using your voice?
Yeah, I've been asked this before. So this is funny. I think that we have to sort of place some limits on ourselves and our time. And, I think that if I was to get on to Clubhouse, I think I'd like it. And that is why I'm not getting on Clubhouse because I do like interaction, and I do like to talk about things together. But right now, there's only so many hours in the day, and I have, 2 teenage sons and an amazing husband and a family. And I just, I can't really add anything else. I'm also not on Instagram, actually. I hear every day from my friends, they can't believe I'm not on Instagram, but I'm not on Instagram because I like it. I think I'd like it. I'm not on TikTok because I like it. And so right now I have decided to make my, you have an academic home, your academic home is SGIM, ACP, whatever. My social media home right now for professional work is Twitter. It's probably where it's going to be. If that changes, I reserve the right to change my mind, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. And then for my personal life, I use Facebook, but I haven't really taken on any others because I think I'd like it. And I don't have time.
Question, just sort of switching gears now. I was listening recently to the 2020 wrap-up episode with Mark Shapiro's Explore the Space podcast that you were on. It was really an incredible episode, and I would highly recommend to everyone on the call, everyone listening in, to go have a listen to that as well. But something that particularly resonated with me during that was when you were talking about stepping way outside your comfort zone, how you moderate sort of the intense fear that comes with that, and how sort of you tell yourself to just do it scared. I think many of us who are on the call are contemplating or have embarked on new journeys like these social media internships, new podcasts, like myself, and a variety of new challenges that they're somewhat apprehensive about. I wonder if you could share more about this philosophy of doing it scared with us.
Well, it's a philosophy, but it's a work in progress. I definitely don't want to make it sound like I've reached this point where I'm like, I do it scared and I just walk into it like, yeah, let's go. That isn't really how it is. Sometimes I'm almost paralyzed. This is where your peer mentors come in. I have some very good peer mentors that and some, and again, just much like those other mentors, you start to know who can help you with certain things. I have this one particular peer mentor who is very good at dealing with me at the worst of my imposter syndrome, not in a way where it's like, girl, you're awesome. Not that. Somebody who really gets it and believes me when I'm scared. And, so I think that having supportive individuals who actually get what it is you're about to do, not, because I could call my mom and she'll tell me I'm awesome, right? But I think that you have to have a really supportive network. And then there's this space where, I want to be in a zone of development, Caitlin. I want to be someone who is always growing and not stagnant. And to be in a zone of development, you absolutely are going to have to do something that makes you uncomfortable. The question is just how uncomfortable are you willing to get? And to me, that translates to risk. At the risk of me looking stupid in front of a whole bunch of people, am I willing to take this risk and try this thing? And is it too far of a shot for me? Or is it actually something that I could potentially do if I just kind of calm down and think it through? So what comes to mind, I think on that show, I mentioned doing the clinical problem solver as an unknown case and was asked to do it with Gurpreet Dhaliwal. I was like, but even that, Gurpreet is my friend. So I knew that it would be psychologically safe. But recently, just about 2 weeks ago, I was a visiting professor at an institution, and they kept putting on the schedule for me to do this mystery case. And I kept offering them other talks. I'm like, I can give you a talk on implicit bias, on being a better upstander. I can talk to you about beast mode. I gave them every talk I had. I had everything, like a whole library. And they were adamant. They're like, we want you to do a mystery case. And I called, Valencia, who's one of my favorite friends, to get me off of ledges. And we sort of talked it through. And she said, the worst thing that could happen is they could present you something that you don't know at all. What will you do? Let's talk about what you'll do. And we talked that out. And it was fine, actually. It was fine. It was more than fine. It went really well. But I was terrified. My heart was pounding the whole time. And I was glad I did it. So I think that the cool part is after you finish doing something scared, there's this feeling that you have that's unmatched, where you're like, okay, that was okay. I could probably do something more. And then I think about the fact that I'm sure they never had a Black woman discuss a mystery case at this institution. I know they hadn't. Because, I mean, if you think about all the shows we listen to, have you heard a Black woman as a mystery case discussant? No, probably not. And so I think about like, wow, what will that mean to this medical student or aspiring medical student who's listening to this? And it's like, this Black girl from Inglewood that went to Tuskegee and Meharry got a case of ehrlichiosis on a mystery case. That's the bomb, you know? So I think a lot of things are bigger than us. And that is a motivator for me based upon my identity.
I think we're of the time coming. So maybe I'll try to do kind of a closing question and then have our fearless leader, Caitlin, kind of wrap us up. But as part of this of being outside the comfort zone, one of the things that you write about in your tweets, your authenticity comes off so clearly. And, you know, I personally very much appreciate it. And I think a lot of your followers do. The vulnerability that you share with people, how important is that vulnerability in gaining and reaching an audience? And is there ever hard lines for you on Twitter that you don't share? Or how do you kind of navigate the openness and vulnerability to a very public audience?
You know, I think that you kind of do what is normally you. So, you know, Patrick Zaka is on this call. He was my senior resident on awards before. And quite frankly, what you see on Twitter is what I'm like. If a patient is dying and it makes me sad, it is not unusual for me to step in the hallway and start crying to my team and saying how sad I am about this and how I just need a minute. But that's my personality. And if that's not your personality, that's okay. I think it's okay if you're more stoic and the way that you emote is different, but that's me. And so there have been times in my life, you know, where I've just worked so hard to walk lockstep with what I think is the thing that you're supposed to do and be. And that is an exhausting thing to do. You know, I talk a lot about eating up cognitive effort and emotional effort on things that don't matter. And nobody can be a better version of me than me. So I'm just going to pour my energy into being me. And that means I might start crying. I might be vulnerable, you know. And I also find that over time, as a person who likes to tell stories and shares, you know, blogging taught me that people respond most to seeing your imperfections. So when I would write a blog post about somebody cussing me out in a hospital because I said the wrong thing, a whole bunch of people would comment and they'd be like, I love this post. And I think it's because people like the idea of you not being perfect, because none of us are perfect. And if you tell somebody that you said the wrong thing or that you were biased toward a trans woman in the hospital that you were caring for, and she called you out on it and you learned from it, I think that permits other people to be wrong and to do better. Because ultimately, that's how we do better, right? You do something, you get feedback on it. Sometimes that feedback happens in the form of somebody going off on you. Sometimes it happens in the form of, you know, somebody talking to you one-on-one in quiet. And I just think that showing vulnerability permits other people to be authentic in who they are. So that's why I do that. So I don't really draw much of a line. I do honor my family and their privacy. My partner is very, very private, and I do limit how much I say about him. And because of that, you know, and any of my friends who are private. And so I'm careful in those spaces. But as it comes to me, I'm over me. So I do me.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That was an excellent near hour now of discussion. I really appreciate you coming on to the show, being our first guest on, and everything you've shared. And just in the name of vulnerability, I'd like to thank you for inspiring me to do it scared. And I think many people on here will agree that they're going to take that on in their lives as well. So again, thanks so much. And thanks so much to the team and everyone attending here who participated in this today.
Thanks for these awesome questions. And thank you all for all of the impactful work that you're doing. I'm so proud to feel like I'm a part of this community. I feel like a crasher to this community, but I'm glad to be a crasher to your community.
You're welcome anytime, Dr. Manning. It was an absolute honor to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you all. And I know this is going to be amazing. I can't wait to listen to all of the really awesome people that you bring on. So thanks for letting me be here. And of course, I'm a friend of the pod. So definitely let me know how I can support you going forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manning. Appreciate it.